Bon après-midi tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to mention that the sound tests have been done and completed. All of our witnesses are online. No one is here in person for the first panel. We will begin with Professor Alan Pietroniro from the Forum for Leadership on Water, FLOW. Professor Pietroniro, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Go ahead.
To speak on behalf of FLOW. I'll be covering topics around water monitoring today. So let's get right at it here. The water monitoring and the data it produces is fundamental and key to addressing the myriad of environmental issues, contributing to water research, supporting water management, creating sound water policy, and underpinning the economic prosperity of Canada. Climate change adaptation and resilience strategies also will require improved and integrated water monitoring to ensure future prosperity for Canadians. We know Environment and Climate Change Canada, through its National Hydrological Service, conducts hydrometric water quantity monitoring across Canada. This national network is co-managed with all of the provinces and territories through a cost-share agreement that dates back to 1975. This arrangement ensures consistent and standardized data collection across Canada and data that are quality assured and readily available in real time, as well as maintained in a historical archive. This co-management approach allows for federal and provincial network operators to work together in a collaborative framework and is an ideal model for other national monitoring programs to follow. That said, the network of hydrometric monitoring stations has not recovered to the levels that it was at in the early 1900s, and is well recognized that more stations are required to effectively address Canada's current and evolving water information needs, particularly as we know that the impacts of climate change are being realized through accelerations in the water cycle, affecting both floods, droughts, and ecosystems. Although provincial investments in expanding the network have increased substantially, largely as a response to floods and water management challenges at the local level, overall the number of stations has slightly decreased. This has been largely due to federally funded stations within the network being reduced substantially in the mid-1990s. There was a significant increase in the federal monitoring budget in 2017, but that funding was focused on fixing a long-standing and significant infrastructure and technical debt in the program. The new funding focused on modernization of the network, managing inflationary operating costs, and addressing loss of infrastructure from fire and floods, leaving very little for network expansion. More funding needs to be allocated for targeted network expansion. One case for expansion is to address the lack of monitoring on Indigenous lands, which comprises a substantial area of Canada. Past external audits have identified Indigenous lands as a federal priority for hydrometric monitoring, and this issue was recently reinforced in an internal program audit in 2023 that highlighted this concern and identified a course of action for moving forward with this by 2025. This will require additional funding and extensive Indigenous consultations. An Indigenous partnership culminating in a water monitoring agreement should be the goal of this effort. ECC also houses the Water Quality Monitoring Program. It has been recognized that water quality and quantity monitoring need to be more integrated. However, fragmentation of water programs in ECCC has impeded the integration efforts. A report in 2017 produced by a Blue Ribbon panel identified this, along with other issues related to water monitoring requirements within ECC. Another important water monitoring program that deserves more attention is groundwater monitoring. This program is largely carried out by the provinces and through rural municipalities in Canada, but national scoping and data collation resides in Natural Resources Canada. There are important linkages between surface and water and groundwater, but there is limited to no interaction between ECCC and NRCan monitoring programs. The Forum for Leadership in Water provides numerous submissions calling for all water monitoring programs to be part of the Canada Water Agency. The motivation for this is based on the cooperative approaches required for successful integrated monitoring between multiple levels of government and with First Nations. The agency would facilitate this cooperative type of approach, allow for multiple levels of government, including First Nations, NGOs, and industry to contribute to an integrated approach. No one federal department can achieve this. Flow has been made aware that none of these water monitoring programs will be incorporated into the Canadian Water Agency. However, we hope there is potential for additional water monitoring components to be included in the CWA at a later stage. Finally, at this point, it's not clear how the CWA will provide any oversight, input, or vision for water monitoring in Canada. Flow is therefore proposing that a minimum, a water monitoring table be established by the CWA to facilitate dialogue and promote coordination among the water monitoring programs housed in the different federal departments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We'll go now to Tim Faveri, Vice President, Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations at Nutrien Limited, and he is joined by Mr. Mike Nemeth, Senior Advisor, Agriculture and Environment Sustainability. I assume it's Mr. Faveri who will be speaking?
Yes, it is.
Okay, go ahead, please. Or is it
Thank
Faveri?
you, Mr. Chair.
Did I pronounce that properly? Is it
Faveri, yes.
Faveri, yeah,
you.
sorry about that. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the introduction and the invitation to appear today. Mike and I are joining you from Calgary, and I'd like to honor our company's practice in acknowledging that we come to you from Treaty 7 territory. I'll start with a few words on Nutrien, now the world's largest producer and provider of crop inputs and services. Our global business spans 4 operating segments across 13 countries, including our retail division, also known as Nutrien Ag Solutions, and the manufacturing and mining of potash, nitrogen, and phosphate fertilizers. We have fertilizer production and sales of over 30 million tons, and our retail business serves over 500,000 growers and 150 million acres around the world. And we are proudly headquartered in Canada. With this comes great responsibility to safely and sustainably feed a growing world. We call it feeding the future. That's our purpose, and which is more important than ever. By some estimates, the use of fertilizer accounts for approximately 50% of global crop yields and is critical for growers to meet the continued growth and demand for food, fuel, and fiber. Water is an essential input to our operations, especially in mining and fertilizer production. And waterways are a crucial natural infrastructure asset for our transport of our products to market. In 2022, Nutrien achieved WAVE certification, verifying our company's commitment to the use of credible water-related data and best practices for water stewardship performance. Less than 2% of Nutrien's water intake is from water-scarce regions. Agriculture is also highly dependent on water, but localized challenges exist regarding availability, quality, which can vary significantly by region and are often intensified by the effects of climate change. Nutrien is committed to working collaboratively to address water-related challenges and opportunities. We support watershed stewardship in agriculture, starting at the farmer's field, through use of practices like 4R nutrient stewardship products and digital tools that support sustainable agriculture and water stewardship in the entire agri-food value chain. With water, you must always be proactive, and Nutrien occupies a unique position in the value chain as an input producer and retailer, and leverages that role to ensure the protection of the environment while demonstrating a business case to our customers. We've had success in using a carrot, not a stick approach, with our customers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through carbon markets. We see the same opportunity and potential for markets to positively benefit water and biodiversity. Several years ago, we initiated a pilot with value chain partners to try and understand how we can support growers in driving positive water outcomes on the farm and in the watershed through management practices, products, and solutions, all based on good agronomy. We brought together diverse stakeholders within the Lake Winnipeg Basin, Alice Canada, the Water Council, BASF, General Mills, and JR Simplot, and with counsel from the likes of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Manitoba Association of Watersheds, Ducks Unlimited Canada, and more. Phase 1 plainly demonstrated the water, soil health, biodiversity, and climate, and most importantly for growers, the financial return of on-farm water stewardship plans. The social return on investment was $6.50 for every dollar invested in on-farm practices, 15 times the amount for every dollar invested in wetlands enhancement. Phase 2, which began last fall, will run for 2 years with focus on implementing the water stewardship plans, documenting and assessing the environmental outcomes and values from actions taken, scaling this work with other stakeholders in the region, and continuing to build the business case for investing in on-farm water stewardship. We've appreciated the support of Government of Canada to date and asked the committee to support continued investment in these efforts, as well as examine the potential for market-based mechanisms to drive adoption. With that, I thank the chair and the members for their time.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Chief Billy Joe Tuccaro, who I think many of us met when he was here a couple of weeks ago. Welcome. Welcome to the committee. Chief Tuccaro, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Creator, my elders, and community members. I'd also like to thank you for inviting me to speak to the committee today. Today, I sit on my Treaty 8 homelands as the chief of the Mi'kmaq Cree First Nation. We are the largest First Nation downstream from the world's largest resource extractive industrial development in the northeastern part of what is now known as Alberta. For as long as the sun shines, grass grows, and the rivers flow, this is what we were promised in Treaty 8. It was understood by our ancestors that this was about spirit and intent to recognize a nation-to-nation relationship. Our way of life and who we are as Mi'kmaq people depend on water for all aspects of our traditional, cultural, inherent rights. It connects us to our ancestors. It is what connects us to us as human beings. For us, water is boss. Our elders remind us that before we were born into this world, we have lived our first 9 months in water. It sustains and gives us life. We are dependent on water. Without water, we will die. Water holds memory that is transferred to us. That is our relationality. As Mi'kmaq people, we rely on our local water sources on a daily basis as we hunt, harvest, and fish as intended in our Promise Treaty. I will speak about how Canada got into this situation. Then I will talk about fresh water as it relates to Mi'kmaq in 2 ways: its quality and its impacts on our health, and its quantity and its impact on our culture. For decades, Canada has participated in the approval of the oil sands industry mine by mine with no mechanism for managing its cumulative effects. Canada and the Alberta Energy Regulator have authorized the withdrawal and use of water from the Athabasca River and the accumulation of truly staggering volumes of semi-solid toxic waste. Canada told us all that they would find a solution to tailings. The government has issued 3 federal reports saying that they would find a solution to the tailings. 30 years later, there is none. In our traditional territory, there is now at least 1.8 trillion liters of process-affected water. This is highly toxic liquid waste that is formed by various industrial processes. That number continues to grow daily, and the waste in those ponds would fill enough swimming pools to reach 3/4 of the way around the earth. The tailings ponds are the largest industrial waste site on the planet. Industry is telling us that their best option is to treat and release all the dirty water. And what they're not telling you is that their plan for all those tailings is to put them in pits and cover them with the water and walk away. Is this truly an option? For whom? Industry? We are being told that the same 2 levels of government who approved the industry then turned a blind eye to our concerns about health and the cumulative waste will approve these regulations. Canada is trying to work with us on solving the issues, but is facing increasing pressure from industry. Industry's approach does not meet MICSU's standards. It will not protect the Athabasca River. We say no way. We say that Canada cannot turn the Athabasca oil sands into Canada's largest hazardous waste disposal. While we do suffer the disproportionate impacts of industrial development, other non-First Nation governments benefit from the development. Our traditional territory continues to be altered and extracted at a fast pace, which has and continues to impact our watersheds. I have witnessed our watersheds that I once drank from or swam in as a child become polluted, that we are now fearful of drinking and or swimming. I have witnessed large sores on the moose, fish we hunt, harvest, witness friends and family who are fighting or have died from cancers that we believe are because of naphtenic acids or carcinogens in our watersheds. In the last 9 months, we have lost 2 of our previous chiefs that have succumbed to the cancers, late Chief Peter Powder and Steve Coudray. Our nation is grieving. We are grieving not only as friends and family, but we're also grieving the impacts to our lands and water. The health impacts go beyond cancer and other diseases. Our people don't use the land anymore because they just don't trust the water. This is direct cultural impact. We are seeing increasing rates of opioids, addiction, and mental health issues because of the water crisis we face.
Chief
So tell me,
Chief Tukro,
Yes?
we have gone a little bit over time. We had extra time because other witnesses took less time, but I'm hoping that we'll leave enough time for questions because I'm sure there will be many questions to you. Would it be okay to stop this portion and then open up the questions in a couple of minutes?
That sounds great to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Alors, nous avons enfin...
And now, finally, we have online Elizabeth Hendricks, Vice President, Restoration and Regeneration. She represents the World Wildlife Fund, Canada. Ms. Hendricks, you have 5 minutes.
Thank the committee for inviting me to share my expertise on freshwater and the impacts of climate change and for undertaking this study. Grateful for online technology today. I'm on Mi'kma'ki lands, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. But the land and waters I will be speaking to today are the traditional homelands and territory of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and remain home to diverse Indigenous people. The water and land was and remains Native land, and it is important to keep this front and center. As was mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Hendricks. My role at WWF Canada is Vice President of Restoration and Regeneration. Today, my testimony will illustrate 2 core points. We are facing the dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity. Freshwater impacts are core in that story. And 2, with federal investment, we can address these crises by stewarding, protecting, and restoring nature. This investment will have co-benefits for our communities, economy, and the nature that we depend on for our survival. The challenge in Canada and around the world is that we are witnessing the devastating impacts of a planet that is out of balance. Climate change is a real and present threat, and we're regularly reminded of how much our world has changed with extreme weather events. Recently at the Globe Forum in British Columbia, Premier Eby spoke frankly of the climate impacts to that province. Parts of the province are experiencing high levels of drought, and there is concern that water levels in the dams will prevent their ability to generate power at the level needed to serve customers. Here in Nova Scotia, in 2022, our government put out an analysis of climate change impacts for the future. This report said that by 2050, warmer temperatures would mean that wildfires would be the biggest threat to Nova Scotia. Yet just 1 year after that 2022 report, we watched a massive wildfire devastate the Halifax region. Unfortunately, the climate crisis isn't the only crisis before us. The planet's biodiversity is shrinking, and quickly. There's a slow yet persistent disappearance of nature and the diversity of life on this planet. It is bad for nature, and it is bad for us. Specifically, freshwater ecosystems are undervalued and understudied. Freshwater is critical for the community and species health. There is also a real cost to Canadians. In Manitoba, financial predictions are that the average potential crop yields could fall by 10 to 30% due to higher temperatures and lower soil moisture. Hailstorms in Winnipeg and Calgary combined to cause more than $250 million in damages. And in Regina, unexpected significant snowfall events and resulting road maintenance costs in 2022 produced a municipal operating deficit, and the city is directly linking the growing operational costs with climate change. Operational costs of managing water are also putting major pressures on municipal budgets in Quebec. In 2023, Quebec public security officials announced 89 communities affected by spring flooding, while places like Sutton, Quebec, were addressing the costs of drought conditions. There is a solution. We can tackle the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis by protecting and restoring nature. We can address climate risk communities and economies with addressing freshwater challenges in our communities. Because nature is habitat, the building block for biodiversity. It stores carbon, it absorbs floods, it holds the earth in place, preventing landslides and erosion. It keeps freshwater available and accessible for food production, sanitation, and basic needs, and nature keeps our communities resilient. Nature-based solutions can help our towns and cities be more climate resilient and natural disaster resilient too. Do you know a healthy silver maple can absorb 220 liters of water per hour? That is a lot more than a concrete culvert. Healthy terrestrial ecosystems can ensure healthy freshwater ecosystems that collect, store, and filter water. Restoring blue carbon peatland and wetlands can absorb significant carbon emissions and support our communities. The strength of the federal government lies in reconciliation and investment via the power of convening and capacity building. And here's where you come in, because you are all committed to promoting responsible, innovative, and effective water resource management through this study. You have a voice and authority, and your expertise carry a lot of weight in your parties and in your home communities and ridings. Ridings with voters that are all experiencing the real impacts of climate change. In the face of biodiversity and climate crises, water management through freshwater restoration and protection strategies are going to be critical to mitigating the risk and threats and impacts of climate change. With that, thank you for your time. I'll pass.
Thank you. Mr. Cram, you have 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to start with Mr. Favre from Nutrien. Mr. Favre, you talked in your opening statement about on-farm water stewardship plans. Could you elaborate on what these on-farm water stewardship plans are? Are they mandated by governments? Are they partnerships between Nutrien and the farmers? If you could elaborate on that, that would be very helpful.
Sure, they're highly voluntary, but I'd like to pass it to my colleague Mike, who's runs these programs.
Hi, yes. So when we say on-farm water stewardship plans, those are voluntary, as Tim stated. And what we're doing is piloting those right now in a credible way using an international water stewardship standard with the farmers and the agri-food value chain members to develop water stewardship plans that work for each farm. So they're a full farm. They encompass all aspects of the farm, planting, management of all the fields, crop rotation, for our nutrient stewardship. And the idea is to make sure that we're tying good agronomic practices that support profitable, productive, and resilient farms while producing positive water, biodiversity, climate, and social outcomes. So in doing these plans, we're piloting with growers to understand how best to do this water stewardship planning across regions, how it can create value at the farm, but also in the value chain to really understand what's the business case for value chain investments in water stewardship.
And what is the incentive for the farmer to participate?
Right now, actually, the farmers that are involved, the incentive was for them to pilot it with us in an innovative way. Nothing like this has been done anywhere else in the world. So piloting it in Canada and piloting it with value chain members and understanding that there was the potential for value creation for their operations was their incentive.
Okay, and Mr. Favre, in your opening statement, you talked about how you prefer a carrot, not a stick approach to water. But besides the besides the on-farm water stewardship plans, do you have any other examples of where the carrot has worked better than the stick, so to speak?
Sure. So we've demonstrated through our sustainable ag programs, and particularly with nitrogen management, and utilizing the federal price on carbon to incentivize growers to shift their practices, become more nutrient efficient by rewarding them through that price on carbon and the amount of greenhouse gas reductions that can be modeled and measured on the field. And that has been very successful. We've actually scaled that across Western Canada, well over 400,000 acres.
And still with the nutrient witnesses, in your opening statement, you talked about how water is a key input for potash mines. Can you give the committee an idea of what type of regulatory process Nutrien has to go to open a new potash mine? Like how much money does it cost? How much time does it take to get the regulatory approvals?
So we haven't broken ground on a nitrogen site or mine site for many years in Canada. Obviously, there are significant regulatory issues and approvals that would need to be created. What we do know, though, is our strategy is to utilize our brownfield sites for production expansion. So I'm probably not the best individual to answer those questions because of our lack of recent development in this area.
Is there a chance that the lack of recent development is because of the regulatory burden?
Great question. The regulatory burden obviously exists, but again, our strategy is around working with the assets that we do have in line with our market demands.
Okay, and can you give the community an idea, if you want to open a new potash mine, are the regulations mostly federal or mostly provincial, or is it both?
Some federal, but mostly provincial. Okay,
and also in your opening statement, you said that Nutrien operates in 13 different countries. Can you give the community an idea of what type of regulatory processes exist in other countries as compared to Canada, and maybe what works well in other countries that we could borrow here?
Sure. Well, in every country we operate, regulatory requirements are significant, and it takes many years for us to go through that process. What works well is for example, what's happening in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act, incentives to stimulate growth in sectors where we operate. But every time we would look into that activities, it's a very complex assessment of different material factors. So water would be one, and access to water, and for Nutrien, it's actually access to tide water to get our products out to global markets, but also fresh water for our operations.
Thank you.
Greenhouse gas emissions, etc.
Thank you. We'll have to go now to Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Chief Tuckerow, I'd love to hear any comments that you weren't able to make because of time. If you could maybe open up my questions by finishing your comments, if there are any that you'd like to make.
Thank you, Lloyd. I appreciate that. Yes, I had one more point to make, and it was in regards to finally, I will end with the existing quantity of fresh water in our territory. Over the decades, Miksuk Cree First Nation has and continues to raise serious concerns with the quantity of fresh water, not only from industry resource development, but also from BC Hydro, Bennett Dam, and most recently, the Site C, that affect our beloved Peace Athabasca Delta. When we cannot access the lands because of low water levels, we cannot hunt and gather. The impacts of our rights and culture, our food, security, and our identity. The solutions offered through Parks Canada are unmeaningful and don't provide any real solutions to the low levels that we witness year after year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tuckero. And in our last meeting, I made reference to a comment that you made to me when we met, when you were in Ottawa a few weeks ago, about what living on the land actually means in real experience in terms of making tea out of snow or children being able to swim in lakes without parents worrying about them getting sick. Could you maybe give us a little bit more insight as to how water, bad water, affects the real time of hunting, gathering, or having recreation?
Okay, yes. Thanks, Lloyd. I'll elaborate on that. In regards to the water and what it's doing to my people and why we cannot hunt and gather, as much as we would like, a lot of times people people are going onto the land for recreational use and as well just for being there, just for mental health. And in regards to that, since the Curl incident in May of 2022, a lot of my people have turned away from the traditional way of life of being on the land in regards to hunting and trapping, because people are afraid to eat the stuff that they're harvesting on the land. There is and then what's that doing is a lot of the people that are usually out on the land, they're staying in the community a lot more, and that is creating social problems with my people. A lot of them are turning to opiates in regards to what's going on in my community. We're also having an opiate crisis and a major drug issue. And before the Curl incident and what's been going on with in regards to my people and on the land, like Lloyd mentioned, I mentioned to him, and when I was in Ottawa, a lot of my people, when they go on the land, they take the snow right from wherever they are. They make the snow water in regards to tea and coffee. A lot of my people don't do that anymore, and a lot of my people too as well. They don't use the beach area in regards to swimming anymore because of they're not sure of what's going on with the water in regards to the Curl incident. It's still continuing to seep to this day. And we have seen a huge escalation in regards to cancer in the last 2 years. I would say I know for a fact as the chief, I know between 40 to 50 people that have been diagnosed or their cancers have been in remission and they have now resurfaced. And in regards to, we also, we got the rarest form of cancer, the bile duct cancer. And when my people are diagnosed with that, they're perished within a couple of months. I've seen it firsthand. One of my best friends, I was in the hospital with him when he was diagnosed with this rarest form of cancer about 20 years ago. His name was Grant Coudray. And I spoke with the doctor there. I was just being, just wanted to know what was going on. Then the doctor told me at the time, he said, Mr. Tuckero, that the treatment that we gave your best buddy here, all it did was speed up his death because they don't have any idea of how to treat it.
Right. And another impact was that people don't want to go to the doctor because they don't want the bad news.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a lot of people are afraid right now. Like I know for a fact that there is couples, a man and wife, they leave here. The husband took his wife out, and his wife was being treated, so he started not feeling well as himself. So he decided to get an opinion there while he was in Edmonton, and same thing with him, diagnosed with cancer already. So these are the real issues. That's what's going on in the community.
And finally, the hunters have to buy flats of bottled water, which is ridiculous, and the cost of bottled water is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a flat of 24 water right now in community is $20, $27, $28. And since the incident, Imperial has sent water in community. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
But like I said too, this is a long process where it's going to take a lot of trust for.
Thank you.
A lot of trust to be gained. Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Madam Posey.
Alors, merci beaucoup.
Ms. Posey, thank you to all of our witnesses, and thank you, Chief. It's a very big pleasure for me to see you again. The more we learn about this environmental and humanitarian catastrophe due to tar sands, the more we are indignant about what's going on. You say that you depend on water and you would die without it. You've just provided some examples. I'd like to talk about your relationship with the federal government. Bill C-61, which is a bill on drinking water for Indigenous populations. We are talking about water sources, and the Athabasca River is your water resource. The government has to act with integrity in all its relationships and with Indigenous communities. There are 3 ministers that have visited you, and none of them have acted with integrity. C-61 is at the 2nd reading now. Do you really believe that your concerns were considered adequately by the government?
Did the translation interpretation come through, Chief?
No, it didn't.
Oh.
Did he not get the interpretation?
You must have. Did you have your the setting on English? I guess you would. Yes. I mean, but you didn't hear any of the translation.
No.
Okay. Okay. Est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant? Est-ce que vous
Do you hear me now in English? On the English channel? Chief, do you hear me on the English channel here?
You'll see a little globe, I think, on your screen.
Yep.
Is it on English?
No. It's on original audio, so I'll just go to English now.
Yeah. Est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant?
Do you hear me now on the English channel? Do you hear the interpretation into English? Do you hear me in English?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, on recommencer, Madame Posey.
All right, you may start over, Ms. Posey. So he didn't change his channel? Say something in French. Hello, Chief. It's a pleasure for me to see you again. Do you hear me now? Perfect. All right, we'll start over. Here's what I was saying. The more we learn about this humanitarian and environmental disaster due to tar sands, the more indignant we become. You provided multiple examples of how water is essential, otherwise you would die, and that is what your community is going through. Our study is on drinking water. The Athabasca River is your source of drinking water. The government, therefore, must act with honor and integrity and goodwill towards all Indigenous communities. I think there are 3 departments that should be concerned, but it seems as though not a single one has acted with integrity and honor. So I am referring to Bill C-61, which is a bill on drinking water for First Nations. Do you believe that your concerns have been taken into consideration by the government?
Good afternoon. You guys can hear me good, right? In regards to Bill C-61, I can say this as the chief in regards to our concerns have not been met for the bill. Why I'm stating that is because in regards to where we're situated downstream from oil sands, and especially being the largest wastelands, we need the reason why we're saying it's not adequately for us is because Bill C-61, how could we say that in regards to where we live that we should have the same guidelines in regards to the different thresholds and in regards to some things that aren't even being tested for, like the naphthenic acids. That's something that we know that's potential cancer causing. So we as Mixu people truly believe we haven't been consulted with in regards to that, because I'm going to go back to it. How could we have the same guidelines for the people that live in Ottawa and the people that are living downstream? Because right now, where we're situated, everything goes by parts per million, where 0.05 is adequate. And anything below that is what's accumulating in my people. That's the cumulative effects. So that's the reason why we're saying that we need those thresholds to be brought down in regards to where we are situated. Thank you.
Donc, ce que je comprends bien,
If I understand correctly, with regards to Bill C-61, you haven't been consulted. For 20 years, your community has been asking for a study on health for your community by the federal government. In 2019, you asked once again, and at that point, Tech Frontier was considering setting up shop in your community. Other First Nations have also asked for the same kind of studies. So there have been many requests made by your community towards the federal government, and nothing has ever come from it. What motive, be it Health Canada or Fisheries and Oceans, does the government give in order to just justify this and ignore your requests?
Can you elaborate more on that, please? Thank you.
For 20 years, you have been asking for a study on the health of your communities to the federal government. You asked again in 2019, and nothing has been done, I believe. How have your requests been received? What did they say to you? Did they even answer, first and foremost?
Okay, thank you. In regards to the health study, it's something that we've tabled for about 20 years or so in regards to what's happening in this area. And it always boils down to lack of funding. Again, we were in Ottawa there a couple of weeks ago, and we had mentioned this with the health minister as well. And again, same thing was with the lack of funding. And it blows my mind that where we're situated with the economic engine of Canada, that we cannot find some money to do a health study that can give us an idea of what is going on in the area. I can say this as the chief of Mixu, we haven't ever been anti-industry at all. We know there's safer ways of things being done, and that's why we're asking for these different guidelines and thresholds to be lowered, so my people can have a chance for a longer life expectancy, like the rest of Canada. And it blows my mind as the chief of the Mixu Cree First Nation that the federal government would even consider a Bill C-61, an act representing water source water, drinking water, wastewater, and related to infrastructure and First Nations lands. Why do we have to be a second tier in this community and this country, the country that we're the first peoples of this land? And then that tells me that there's two tiers. Why can't we have the same access of clean drinking water you guys get in Ottawa? And that's another thing too, is they talk treat and release. I'll agree to treat and release if they can put that pipeline and you guys could drink that water first in Ottawa.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
how serious I am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go now to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. And I have questions for Chief DeCaro, Ms. Hendricks, and Mr. Petronino. I'm sorry if I've gotten your name wrong. Maybe first I'll start with Chief. I think you spoke really powerfully about the impacts on your community, and you and your people deserve your inherent right to clean water. And this would never be happening in a city like Ottawa or Montreal or Vancouver or Victoria, where I represent. And sorry for the darkness of my screen. Since you last appeared in Environment Committee, what has your experience been with Imperial Oil, the federal government, the Alberta Energy Regulator? Do you feel like any of your concerns have been taken seriously? Has there been adequate responses?
Okay, who did you mention? The AER?
So the federal government, the Alberta Energy Regulator, and Imperial Oil.
Okay. Okay, in regards to the AER, their response is, again, they just can only do what I'm going to be honest and say, well, they can't really do much because they can't bite the hand that feeds them, because that's who they get their funding from, is in industry themselves. So again, they're coming back into the community on March 5th, I believe, to do another open house, and they're going to try to repair the relationship in regards to the lack of trust that was broken a couple of years ago. And the feds too is like I'm saying, is how we know these changes will be made if these recommendations that we're putting forward in regards to all the different thresholds being lowered. Because till this day, as First Nations people, it's hard to take word when we'd rather see action. And with Imperial, I can say that they've stepped up to try to improve the relationship in regards to the what was broken a couple of years ago. We've had some meetings with them. We've also they've bought water into the community a few times. For that, the community is thankful. But in regards to that, there's still lots of work to be done to repair the relationship in regards to all those three. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I just feel like, your community deserves access to clean drinking water, also to clean water for hunting and fishing and swimming in lakes. Yeah,
but the thing is too, please. Like what the thing is, like sure, we're getting the drinking water, but a lot of my people are scared to use it for bathing and just even for cooking and stuff like that. That's a lot on the mental health.
Yeah,
and it's a long ways to go.
And honestly, the what you shared about the disconnection from the land that happens when people can no longer use water in traditional ways, and what that means for the impact of the opioid crisis in your community. These are really serious impacts, and the federal government has a responsibility to step up and to listen to your recommendations. I have a small amount of time, so I do want to ask Ms. Hendricks a couple of questions. And in particular, I wanted to ask you about the cost of climate change and the cost that we're seeing when it comes to water. We've heard from our conservative colleagues sometimes that climate action costs too much money. I'm just curious, from your perspective, how do you respond to those kind of concerns?
I think the cost of inaction is going to be too much. We see increasingly every year the insurance companies are coming out and saying this is like billions of dollars. I think last year was $3 billion of climate-related insurance impact. If you want to talk investment and why aren't we, when we flow dollars, looking at those investments with a climate lens? So I would say, if you want to talk, nature agreements, health agreements with provinces and municipalities, Green Municipal Fund, those should all be with a fresh water and a climate lens to maximize those benefits and maximize those investments and be more efficient with our use. We can't afford to Insurance companies have also said we can't they won't insure houses built on floodplains. Why are provinces or federal governments supporting rebuild on floodplains? We need to be looking at the lenses, or we're wasting that money. And so nobody wants in this economy to see a waste of money. And I would just say we can no longer ignore nature and the needs of nature. And there are tons of ways to increase those investments to benefit both communities and nature at this point.
Merci. Alors, le temps est écoulé, malheureusement.
Thank you. Your time is up. Sadly, we are now on to the second round of questions. I will have to cut the time from 25%. Mr. Major, on to you for 4 minutes.
Thanks for coming out today. My questions this afternoon will be for Nutrien. I was in your opening remarks, and I think this bears repeating here. In your, you said here the use of fertilizers accounts for approximately 50% of global crop yields and is critical for growers to meet the continued growth in demand for food, fuel, and fiber. That's pretty. I didn't think it was that high. I've farmed all my life, and I've been in foreign policy all my life, and I didn't think it was that high. 50%. So if we were to stop or reduce any type of fertilizers in our agriculture industries right now, we would start reducing at least 50% of our food production. And that's quite an important thing to remember as we talk about how we deal with water and how we deal with fertilizers. So, and we do know that fertilizer is needed to grow food and to feed the world. Can you tell the committee how important water is to fertilizer production?
Thank you. Yes, so for fertilizer production, water is pretty critical for our industrial processes in nitrogen and phosphate manufacturing. In mining, less so. It's a closed loop system that we use in potash mining. What's very important is the fact that fresh water is available with respect to at the start of our process. Mike, if there's anything else you would like to add, please do so.
Yeah, just to add, it's critical in all of our milling processes, slurry use, and without fresh water, even the rates that we can recycle and reuse water, fresh water is absolutely critical to the production at all stages. So.
And I know lots of fertilizer plants get accused of, like, when they off the cooling towers. We were talking, like, there's millions of gallons a day basically that are just in evaporation, and you need water to cool things off, and that it was always quite astounding. Never mind about the water you need to make water for the boilers, for the processes, and all those kind of things that people don't really consider just to make a ton of fertilizer and to feed over 50% of the world. You touched earlier on the regulatory environment, and I'm kind of curious between Canada and the U.S. The both countries work a lot between each other when it comes to fertilizer production and even supply chains. I know the borders back in Brandon there, we're always shipping down to North Dakota, so supplies there. But in dealing with the two different countries and the regulatory burden, are you seeing like a certain pattern here in Canada that we can correct versus the U.S. so we can be more competitive when we can build more fertilizer plants and be more self-reliant?
Well, certainly the incentive infrastructure in the U.S. is very strong. I know the Canadian government and other governments around the world have tried to step up in similar ways as the U.S. has done. The regulatory burden we feel will always exist, to some extent greater in other countries than Canada, and to many extents less burdensome as well. But again, I would just reiterate that we have to look at all the issues with respect to production that we deal with, water being one and a material one, as you indicated and as we've described how important it is. But emissions, labor, access to tide water, etc., are all very, very important factors.
Merci, Monsieur Van Couverden. À vous pour 4 minutes.
Thank you. On to Mr. Van Couverden for 4 minutes.
To all of the witnesses who have come today to provide their testimony. Just to recap, 5.3 million liters of toxic tailings from Imperial Oil's Coral Lake leaked into nearby waterways. Most agree that this includes the Athabasca River. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith has said the Imperial Oil Coral Lake mine, and I quote, had no effect on local waterways or wildlife. When he was here back in December, Imperial Oil CEO Brad Corson corroborated the same when he said that he was happy with how his company has dealt with this disaster. He also said that there was no process-affected water that had entered waterways, despite the fact that Imperial Oil's own reports conceded that some tailings had entered a nearby fish-bearing lake. These are all attempts to minimize this environmental disaster. These attempts by both the Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith, and the CEO of Imperial Oil are extremely distressing. Now, Chief Tuccaro, I've read your letter to the Prime Minister. I agree with the 4 recommendations that you've made. I think anybody would, given the chance to read it. I'll highlight them just to get them on the record here. The requests are collaboration on immediate actions with respect to the availability of safe drinking water, enhanced information sharing, taking action on health risks for and funding for a Fort Chipewyan health study, action to assess and correct tailings risks, which is a federal and Indigenous audit of risks for all tailings facilities in the region, which I would note from research on this study has come to light that most of them are actually designed to leak. And then request number 4 was to take action on the tailings reclamation crisis, including support for enhanced Indigenous-led monitoring and training, identifying action and real solutions to tailings. I want to thank you for taking the time to write that letter. Thank you for advocating to our government. I want to say that we're broadly supportive of all of your requests and recommendations, and we're working to ensure better outcomes for your citizens. Your community deserves better, Chief, and from us, I want to apologize from Canadians. I wasn't satisfied with the answers that we received from Imperial Oil CEO Brad Corson back in December. I heard from members of your community that they weren't either, and we're going to keep holding them to account and demanding better from these oil companies, because it's an absolute disaster which continues to occur. Before I go on, Chief Tuccaro, any reflections on the on progress with that letter, or anything that you'd like us to know that you've made recommendations for since writing the letter?
Thank you, Adam. In regards to what we had mentioned, what you put forward there, the 4 asks, we've kind of hit a wall in regards to those asks. That's the reason why I went to Ottawa last week, because you could only send so much letters, and then when you get there and you find out that 98% of the letters aren't even actually opened up and read. So that's the reason why we made the journey there to actually beg. I'm going to be honest. We went there to beg to get this community health study done. It's 20 years overdue. I was in. I had taken one of my counselor, who's a former chief. She was the one that had pushed the issue 20 years ago. There a lot of these issues that they tabled 20 years ago are still surfacing now. So that's the reason why we made the trek, we made the contacts there, and now we, like I said when I was there last week, that if nothing's done, we'll be back again.
We're going to see you when we travel up to Fort Chip, by the way. But I know that when you say you want to see us, you mean the government departments. Yes. We'll go now to Madame Posé for 2 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Chair, it is official. We will be going to Fort Chip. Do you have the interpretation? Can you hear the interpretation, Chief Tuccaro? Earlier, you mentioned the funds that are necessary, and of course we agree that health is at the core of your concerns. What measures should be prioritized by the federal government in order to protect the water, the health, and the rights of Indigenous nations, communities in Alberta?
Can you provide more information, please, with that question?
Pardon?
Et un peu d'informations là, pour qu'on comprenne mieux.
Oui, ben, vous nous avez...
You made some recommendations. I'd like to know what is a priority for you among those recommendations. For you, what would be the most important measure to take on in order to protect the rights, the health, and the water of Indigenous communities?
The health study that we've been requesting for the last 20 years would go a long way to tell us exactly what's going on in the area. Because I know for a fact, I'm 46 years old. I've had the benefit of living on the land and off the land. And the reason why I choose to live off the land now is because of the dangers that are out there in regards to the water and the animals and the fish and the berries that my people consume for harvesting and stuff like that. So the recommendations we're putting forward in regards to is the health study. We really need that done in community as soon as possible. And I truly believe that.
Est-ce que vous avez pu rencontrer le ministre?
Did you meet the health minister?
No.
Yes or no? We're out of time, but I think he did say that he had met the minister. I'd like to know more about how he was received and the answers he received.
Meet the health minister, did you not, Chief?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And again, it all boiled down to the lack of funds and where they would access it from for the health study.
Okay.
And then I had mentioned to him that they get a lot of money from this from the area extraction. So
I understand.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mrs. Collins now.
Maybe I'll just let the chief finish that thought. You know, oil companies are raking in record profits, billions of dollars. There is a lot of money being made, and the cost of a health study seems, just maybe, Chief, if you wanted to finish your thought.
No, in regards to the health study, yes, a lot of money is taken from this area. And then I know for a fact that the health study that we're proposing is in the neighborhood of $30 million. And we're not asking for everything up front. We're asking for it in installments. And then that the people that are going to be funding, that there is deliverables on our behalf too, to see that there is actually things being done. So I truly believe $30 million is a drop in the bucket. When you hear of an when you hear of an executive making $17 million a year, just one person, I mean, that tells me that there's money available for this to be done. I don't know if they want to do it because they're scared to get that the answers will that they don't want to see. But we need those answers in regards to what's going on in this community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. And our party has been pushing for a excess profits tax on oil and gas companies so that we could put money into supporting communities who are impacted. You know, the government has a responsibility to do this health study, so we're going to keep pushing them on that. I do want to ask quickly, Mr. Petronero, and also to Ms. Hendricks, this question. I'm curious of what you think the role the federal government should play in addressing the climate crisis, and in particular, how funding programs might support nature investments in fresh water, and kind of how you see that in the next few decades.
We'll have time for one person to answer that. It's a big question, but Ms. Hendricks, I think that sounds like it might be a question for you, but a very brief answer, please. Mr. Pietronero, please don't be offended that I didn't go to you, because but go ahead, Ms. Hendricks.
Just because Mr. Petronero hasn't had a chance to answer a question, maybe we could go to him first.
Sure. I'd say from a monitoring perspective, I'd say we have to, from an adaptive management perspective as well, right? You can't really manage what you don't monitor. And so, I'll put that lens on it and say that we should probably
need to
look
do
at
more monitoring.
expanding our monitoring efforts.
Okay, Ms. Hendricks, very quickly, please.
I think we have existing funding programs that I would want to see a freshwater and climate lens placed on it. When we work towards our global commitments to the biodiversity framework, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the ENGO community has requested that we see a lens of biodiversity and freshwater specifically for this study on that funding.
Thank you. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How long do I have?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, thank you. I'd like to start with Nutrien. The stat that my colleague Dan Mazur mentioned is a very important one, that 50% of the food produced is thanks to fertilizer. And I think it's important to highlight that population of 8 billion, we'd be looking at starving about 4 billion people if we didn't have the invention of the Haber-Bosch process. So I'd like to thank your industry for the work that you're doing to support rural communities and farmers and frankly feed our entire population. Now you did mention Nutrien's use of market-based mechanisms to drive grower adoption of lower carbon products and practices. I'm just wondering if you could expand a little bit on what that program has looked like for Nutrien as part of a volunteering of farmers and how that could work with water.
Absolutely. So we use the nitrous oxide efficiency reduction protocol from the government, the Alberta government, plus the conservation cropping protocol. We work with growers to work on executing that protocol, which promotes more or higher nutrient use efficiency, and through that measurement can pay them a price utilizing the federal carbon price for their greenhouse gas reductions and or removals. What's interesting in the project that we're working with in Manitoba on water, if we focus on water conservation or water quality, ultimately we believe there is a net benefit to greenhouse gas reductions as well, plus biodiversity. And in a similar way, those voluntary programs could reward growers for their practice change.
Thank you. And if you could just maybe expand, for those that might not understand, you mentioned the 4R nutrient stewardship application practice. If you could expand on what that process is, why it matters in terms of efficiency, and how it relates to the efficient use of water on plants.
Mike, do you want to take this one?
Sure. 4R outlines the right source of nutrients, the right rate at which it needs to be applied for the crops, the right timing, so that plant uptake is optimal, and then the right placement. So making sure that where possible it's banded under subsoil versus broadcast. So all of these practices combined with technologies such as enhanced fertilizer, efficiency fertilizers, nitrification inhibitors, and other products, and digital technologies such as precision agriculture can all help optimize nutrient use, reduce potential loss to the environment, whether through water or the atmosphere, and ultimately use of water and nutrients in the farmers' fields to both create a more productive and profitable crop, and that's more sustainable from an environmental standpoint.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Namath. Mr. Chair, in my remaining time, I would like to move the motion that I spoke into the record the last meeting of the Environment Committee regarding the Minister of Environment's announcement that there will be no more envelopes from the federal government to enlarge the road network, and asking that our committee condemn Minister Guilbeault's announcement. Now, I think it was perhaps the minister saying the quiet part out loud, and it obviously sent the Prime Minister's office into a communications frenzy to try to backtrack whether or not this government was in fact abandoning supporting all communities in their desire to increase the capacity of our roadway. Unfortunately, it seemed as though from the accidental announcement that this was intentional. It was a decision made by the cabinet with the intention of I suppose trying to curb emissions, taking Canada back to the Stone Age, where we have no power, no vehicles, no new roads, and frankly, no wealth. Obviously, the intention...
Just a second. Ms. Collins, your hand is up. Is that to be on the speaking list, or do you have a point of order? Ms. Collins?
That was just to be on the speaking list.
Okay, got it. I have you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so obviously the intention is to, frankly, to move people out of their cars and onto buses or some sort of mass transit system, which is so tone deaf and out of touch with the vast majority of our nation's space. Now, I did take note that the rural member of parliament for Milton in 2021 did say on Twitter, say it with me, building highways doesn't fight climate change. So perhaps there is agreement across the caucus that in fact we should no longer be building highways and roads in this country. It seems to be a bit at odds with the member of parliament from Pontiac, however, who said, I am very proud to be able to rely on the governments of Canada and Quebec to support the widening of Pink Road as well as other initiatives. So it seems to be very unclear, but what I know is very clear, and I'm sure when we were all back in the riding last week, we had our mayors, our reeves, our city councils come up and say, what is going on in Ottawa? Where did the idea that we would no longer be funding roads come from? And if you didn't hear that, you're not telling the truth. And I'll give you a real-world example from my riding. Highway 3 in Manitoba is extremely busy. It is full of passenger vehicles, farmers, and a whole lot of trucks using it every single day to make sure that we have the goods where they need to be and people where they need to be. And the twinning of sections of this highway will reduce accidents, make sure that those goods get where they need to be on time. But with this Liberal government's commitment to not funding such projects, it sends a terrible message to all those that live and work in my riding and in rural Manitoba and rural Canada across. And my understanding is Minister Guilbeault, the government has not spoken to any provincial or municipal officials before taking this extremist position of not building any more roads. I think it was extremely reckless to, although accidentally, make a clear announcement of what the intention. And I know my colleagues across the way, the rural Liberal MP from Milton, from Guelph, from Aurora Oak Ridges, and from Pontiac, either they're sitting in gridlock near a city or they're traveling long distances. And so I can't fathom that there would be agreement from these members of parliament with this government's position, with this war on cars and commuters and the movement of goods across our country. Now, my hope here today is that we recognize that this was a poor decision, a poor announcement, and that we make the choice to condemn it. I don't think we should just simply adjourn debate, given the diversity of opinions from my Liberal colleagues on this matter. I hope that we can bring this to a vote. If we can have a debate on this, I'm more than happy to do, though. But rather than just adjourning debate and hiding these extremist positions of this radical environment minister, let's have a conversation about this and whether or not this country should be built up with the help of our federal government, or we'd rather go back to horses and buggies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mazier.
Thank you, Chair. This motion basically, what the environment minister said, and I'll reread it, right? Here's the quote. Our government, which meaning the Liberal government, has made a decision to stop investing in new road infrastructure. Can you imagine that? A minister of the Crown. And his government actually backs it up. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have backed that statement up. That is very disturbing. It's a direct attack on rural Canada. Let me be very clear. There's three policies that are hammering rural Canada. The carbon tax, increasing it 23% on April 1st. By increasing the carbon tax, the commissioners already said it, there's various agencies all across government have acknowledged that disproportionately rural Canadians are being impacted by the carbon tax. They know that. And this government keeps on marching on with increasing that carbon tax. That's one. The other one is banning gas-powered vehicles. That's another thing. This minister, that's the goal. 2035, here we're going to have no more gas-powered vehicles in Canada. It's going to create a whole shortage of Canada. So then, that's one. That's the second one. And now we have a minister saying not building any more roads and highways. So why not? So we got rural Canada here, and we know rural Canada needs highways to move around. We're a vast country. Vast country. We need to move our goods. We needed to make a living in Canada. We don't go anywhere without getting on a road in Canada. And this government wants to just get out of that. Stop producing any type of roads. It's absolutely insane. And this is why this radical environment minister should be stopped. This is why we're bringing this motion forward. This is why you should go along with us. Instead of talking against me, trying to drown me out and ignore me, you should be paying attention.
No, excuse me, Mr. Vancouver.
I know, it's your minister that said it.
Mr. Vancouver and Mr. Mazier, this is not a debate between the two of you. This is Mr. Mazier, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, just quick point of order.
Yes.
Just when people are shouting across because their microphones are not on, us online can't actually hear what's going on.
You know, Miss in the back and forth. Anyway, go ahead, Mr. The back and forth on the heckling, you're not missing much, but go ahead, Mr. Mason.
I find it, and it's quite interesting. I know the member from the NDP. I know they have lots of rural ridings that they represent, and I know they get the impact of this statement, and they should be absolutely just appalled, just like I am as well, from that statement. And even just the notion that we're laughing about it. I can't understand why you're so not shocked about this. Like, people in rural Canada are scared. This is a trifecta of policies that are just absolutely punishing rural Canada. And you don't get it. You don't care.
Through the chair, please, Mr. Mazier, through the chair.
Anyways. I didn't say you. I said the Liberals.
Through the chair, please.
So I would encourage the Liberals, NDP, and Bloc to condemn this radical environment minister and stop his attack on rural Canada and support our motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Debate is important, and I welcome debate. But what the Conservatives have consistently done on this committee is use their time, other questions, to distract from what we're doing, which is a study on freshwater. It's incredibly disrespectful to the people who have taken time out of their day. These are researchers, advocates, chiefs of nations, and they don't care. They would prefer to push their agenda, to talk over top of me, and to push their agenda based on misconceptions, misinformation, and taking people's words completely out of context. As Mr. Leslie's reading my tweet said, that was about one highway project in Ontario called the 413, which I stand against. Right? It was. You didn't read the whole tweet, Mr. Leslie. Secondly, the minister's quote was specific to the third link in Quebec City. My colleague, Mr. Deltel, knows about it intimately. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. Our government has invested in 10,833 roadways over the last 7.5 years. This federal investment, it represents more than $4.5 billion. The reason we had to spend so much money is because during the Harper years, there was a massive infrastructure deficit because the Conservatives didn't invest in things like that. We've redoubled it. We've doubled down on investing in community infrastructure through the Canadian Community Building Fund, through the gas tax. We are building Canada, and more infrastructure has been built in the last 8 years than in the 9 years that Harper was in power. So have a look at the numbers, have a look at the details, and please stop taking quotes out of context because it's completely absurd.
Point of order.
I hope it's a point of order.
Yeah, does the member plan on shutting down debate? Pardon? Does the member plan on shutting down debate?
Well, that's, I don't know. It's
and
not a
I've
point of
spoken
order.
for less than half the amount of time that you did.
Okay, Mr. Mazier, when you had the floor, I recognize that you had all the time you would want. Mr. Vancouver, continue, please.
This is a ridiculous motion. This is taking quotes that I've made and the minister's made completely out of context and referring to specific projects that, as MPs, we're supposed to be supportive or not supportive of specific projects. And no, I'm not going to shut down debate on it. I'm just going to vote against it, proudly, because you keep using words like radical to describe our minister. I'm proud of our minister for being an environmentalist. Those four won't even say climate change in this committee. You won't acknowledge the impacts of climate change. So yeah, I'm proud to vote against this ridiculous motion.
But have you called a vote?
No, because my colleague from the NDP has got her hand up, and I'm sure she'd like to speak to it.
Go ahead, sorry. Ms. Collins.
I would want to urge the committee to get through this as quickly as possible. Let's honor the time of the witnesses who are here. I won't say any more, but this feels really disrespectful.
Well, nobody's called for a vote. So
Can't really call for a vote. Debate has to collapse.
Well, there's nobody left.
Sure. Let's vote.
Okay, so let's vote on this.
Mr. Ali? Madame Chatel?
Nope.
Je vote non.
Mr. Longfield?
Against.
Ms. Taylor-Roy? Mr. Vancouverden?
I'm against.
Monsieur Datel?
Pour.
Mr. Cram?
In favor.
Mr. Leslie?
Favor.
Mr. Mazer?
In favor.
Madame Posey?
Contre.
Ms. Collins?
Against.
7 ayes.
Okay, so Mr. Vancouverden, you're the last questioner in this round. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Somebody from our side actually looked up the numbers, and between 2006 and 2014, the federal government invested about $500 million specifically on roadways and related infrastructure, and 2015 to present is $1.6 billion. So triple, actually.
What does that have to do with the study?
Mr. Vancouverden, if you could keep your 4 minutes focused on the water study.
That was so important.
I appreciate
that was really important.
The guidance from Mr. Mazer. I will go back to my comments to my question to the chief regarding the impact that this has had on his community. Before I do, I just preface my question by highlighting a trip that we took last week to meet with the Mushkegowuk Council, 6 or 7 First Nations represented at the meeting, where we committed to protecting 86,000 kilometers squared of coastal territory. And one of the reasons why I felt so strongly about going up and joining this meeting was because of the experiences that I've had on this committee, advocating for your community and other First Nations communities in Alberta who have been affected by this process-affected water and the mining activities that have had such devastating impact on the health of your communities. So I'm proud to be part of a government that is pursuing more opportunities to protect particularly sensitive environmental territory from this development, which has just proven to be unsustainable and unhealthy for communities. So, Chief, back to you on anything else that you'd like to say regarding the impact. And I would say, as I wanted to just at the closing of your last speech, you should never have to beg for attention. And I'll commit myself right now to make sure that anytime you need the attention of the federal government, we're here for you.
That it? Oh, is it? You have a question for the chief? Or?
Yeah, didn't finish last time.
Go ahead, Chief Tuccaro.
No, just I'd like to thank you for being an advocate for us there. In regards to of us like having to beg for this health study, it's something that we feel as Mikshu people that something that should be owed to us. I mean, we're always having to wait for the other communities in the hamlet of Fort Chipewyan. And as we're waiting for everybody to be on board in regards to the health study and getting the feds on board as well, we're losing people by the week. Like I said, and we need some clear answers in regards to what's actually happening. And then, like I said, I'll continue to beg for this health study until it comes to fruition for us. It's a baseline for my people to see exactly what's going on. And I made reference to earlier, one of my previous chiefs, she tabled this 20 years ago. And a lot of the stuff was tabled then is still stuff that's concern to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Alors, you have about a minute, yeah.
Just a quick question for Mr. Favre. When we talk about the 4 Rs, and that was on my notes as well to ask, Guelph is quite involved with precision agriculture. The monitoring systems that go with that, including drones and other technology, is that something that you could bring forward to our committee of how we would measure contamination getting into streams?
Certainly, technology has grown quite a bit over the last number of years, and that's really been the focus of the industry to get better data and monitoring. Right now, still, I would say that the best way to monitor is actually through the taking of soil samples and water samples adjacent to farms.
Okay, merci. Alors, merci aux témoins.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our witnesses. It was very interesting. You have added a lot of context to our discussions, and of course that will be reflected in the report we will be tabling at the end of the study. We will take a short break. We will set up the next panel. Once again, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure, Chief Tuckero, and it will be a pleasure to see you again when we visit you in Fort Chip in May, we hope. All right, so we will begin again and continue the study. Now on this panel, we have Mr. Michael Miltenberger, Special Advisor for the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources.
And done, and the sound meets the standard. So, Mr. Miltenberger, if you could lead us off, please, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and listen to this spirited debate. I'm the Special Advisor to SEER. I did, before I became the Special Advisor to SEER, I did 20 years in the legislature in the Northwest Territories, and I did 14 years on cabinet, 9 as a environment minister, and of those 9 years, I was also finance minister for 7 at the same time. So it's a pleasure to be back inside the ropes briefly. SEER itself is a national organization. It's headquartered in Winnipeg. It was formed by 8 First Nation chiefs about 30 years ago. Chiefs like Phil Fontaine, Manny Jules, Matthew Kuncum, and Roger Augustine. It has completed in its time and continues to complete hundreds of programs with Indigenous communities across the country. Projects such as climate change planning, species at risk management, energy literacy, watershed planning, ecological restoration, and natural infrastructure, to name some. The project that I will be focusing on today is about collaborative water governance. And currently in our country, our systems of water governance are inadequate. The status quo is not working, and no one government can do it alone, especially when it comes to water. Existing decision-making over water is fragmented and siloed. Federal, provincial, and territorial governments make their decisions about water within their respective jurisdictions without processes in place to collaborate with Indigenous governments who are on the front lines of combating the ongoing water crisis and who hold inherent rights over the water in their territory. Collaborative governance structures are critical to good water governance and to recognizing the inherent rights and authorities of Indigenous nations. The Collaborative Leadership Initiative, which is a process developed by SEER to build collaboration on shared water challenges between Indigenous and non-Indigenous elected leaders and their administrations. It focuses on 2 orders of government, Indigenous and municipal, because most water decisions are made at the local level, and these 2 orders of government often have no structured environment or mechanism for collaboration. When first implemented in Manitoba in 2017, when the idea was presented to the chiefs, 11 Indigenous governments and 16 municipal leaders agreed to engage in coming together for the first time at that point in 150 years. Through a series of gatherings, the leaders built trust, learned about each other's communities and water challenges, and began to think like a region. CLI Manitoba's advanced the development of a reconciliation framework while building a co-governance table where government-to-government decisions are made. Having elected decision makers at the table was a critical factor in its success. The leaders collaboratively worked towards a range of shared priorities with water, particularly the health of Lake Winnipeg, at the center of these efforts. And after the CLI process carried on for a series of meetings in 2019, there was a historic MOU signed between all the parties, the elected municipal leaders and chiefs at Lower Fort Garry. And I direct you to the fact that there's a very powerful 20-minute documentary that summarizes the CLI Manitoba process on the SEER website. Building off of this, the National SEER project, which was based on the success of the CLI process in Manitoba, allowed us to secure funding from the BHP Foundation to implement the CLI process with partners in other regions across Canada. This is a 5-year project that recently passed its midway point and is generating valuable learnings and building collaborative water governance rooted in reconciliation. We're working with partners across Canada, including the Northwest Territories, British Columbia, as well as further parties in the Northwest Territories and elsewhere to help create the conditions to change the way water is governed. Our goal is to scale up this work significantly, so we are also creating the resources, tools, and learning networks to enable the growth of the CLI model on a big scale. In the brief we have provided, we have recommendations on how the federal government can better support these collaborative governance initiatives, which I'd be happy to discuss.
Okay, thank you. We could maybe
question and answers.
Sure, thank you very much, Mr. Milton-Berger. We'll go now to Monsieur Jimmy Bouchard, représentant de soutien.
Mr. Jimmy Bouchard, support representative at the Conseil régional de l'environnement et du développement durable du Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Bouchard, on to you. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It is an honor to be with you today on behalf of the Conseil régional de l'environnement et du développement durable du Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. Today I would like to talk to you about 3 topics that I believe are essential to your work on freshwater. I will start with control and regulation of emerging contaminants in drinking water. Quebec is currently facing an unprecedented wave of drinking water sources that are contaminated with PFAS and PFOS, therefore perfluorinated compounds. And nearly a dozen municipalities are waging war on these perennial pollutants. The federal government is currently revisiting its regulations to establish a standard that to date has remained a recommendation. It is high time for federal authorities to act decisively to ensure quality water for Canadians across the country. In my region of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, the city of Saguenay, more specifically in the borough of L'Abbé, is facing the scourge. It seems very likely that the source of the contamination is the Bagotville military base, which is under federal jurisdiction. It appears that this is not the only case in Canada. It seems urgent and necessary for the federal government to act swiftly by adopting a strict standard and assume its responsibilities across the country. Second, I would like to talk about invasive alien aquatic plants. The degradation of water bodies is well underway in several regions of Quebec. Estrie, Montérégie, the Laurentians, and Abitibi-Témiscamingue are facing unprecedented invasions. In some northern regions of Quebec, the problem is not as severe. In other words, there is still time to protect our water bodies from these invasive species. It is no longer a question of if they will be affected, but rather when. Elsewhere in the world, governments have moved quickly to curb this problem. For now, washing boat hulls seem to be the most effective preventive measure. In Quebec, municipalities have the power to require such a measure. Obviously, they must have cleaning infrastructure in place to carry out this obligation. The federal government can and must act on 2 fronts. First, it must significantly improve its assistance programs to build boat washing stations. Second, it must make regulations to control the washing of boats across the country. This can be done in a variety of ways, for example, by requiring ballast water filtration devices and by requiring boats operating on waterways to show proof of washing. The third element I'd like to talk about is the underfunding of water infrastructure. In Quebec alone, the water infrastructure asset maintenance deficit is nearly $35 billion. This amount goes up with every year that passes due to underfunding at the various levels of government. The federal government has a key role to play in ensuring that funding is sufficient to resolve the situation within an acceptable time frame. It must recognize the importance of local municipalities in building resilience to climate change and water issues in cities. If it wishes to be taken seriously in its intention to put in place an effective strategy to protect fresh water, it seems clear to me that priority must be given to the rehabilitation, maintenance, and improvement of municipal stormwater, groundwater, surface water, and wastewater catchment filtration and treatment works. I would suggest greater flexibility when allocating funding for the various programs. Take the example of the CWWF, the Clean Water and Wastewater Fund Program. Financial assistance is granted on a per capita basis. While natural and seemingly fair, this method of allocating funding has some major shortcomings. For municipalities with a population of 6,500 or less, there is the possibility of adjustment, but it is often insufficient. For larger cities, various criteria should be taken into account. For example, the amount of infrastructure in absolute numbers or in kilometers of pipe, and the environmental impact of the projects presented. The city of Saguenay, for example, has as many water facilities, pumping station, filtration, treatment as the city of Montreal, but a population that is 15 times smaller. The objective of the program, which is part of the federal infrastructure plan to further accelerate economic growth and job creation, needs to be reviewed by integrating and prioritizing the environmental gains of submitted projects. In closing, I'd like to draw your attention to governance in terms of environmental jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is delegated by level of government, from municipalities to the provinces and from the provinces to the federal government. The result is a lack of alignment in this delegation of authority. Shared jurisdiction regularly generates conflicts and differences of opinion. All the points I have raised highlight the state of affairs, and I sincerely believe that the federal government would do well to look into this issue and grant Quebec exclusive jurisdiction or at least precedence over environmental matters. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Bouchard. Now on to Mark Fisher, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Council of Great Lakes Region. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to offer some freshwater perspectives from the standpoint of the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence region, which is shared by the United States and Canada, is comprised of 8 states from New York to Minnesota, as well as the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. For millennia, however, we all know that this region has also been the traditional territory for many Indigenous nations and people. Today, it serves as a vital economic and ecological region to both countries. For example, with roughly $6 trillion US in economic activity, which represents close to 10% of global GDP, this region, if it were a country, would represent the 3rd largest economy in the world. It would be behind only the United States and China, and ahead of major economies such as Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Unsurprisingly, border crossings in this mega region are among the busiest in the world because the provinces and territories in this region trade more with each other than with any other country in the world. Over 50 million jobs, 1/3 of the combined American-Canadian workforce, depend on the region's commerce and cross-border trade. At the heart of the economic region is one of the largest freshwater systems in the world, the 5 Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. Over 20% of the world's surface water flows through these lakes before reaching the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the Atlantic Ocean. It sustains 50% of Canada's economic activity and 60% of the country's population, as well as important climatic and ecosystem functions along the way. But while this inland freshwater sea is vast in size, the Great Lakes are a finite natural resource. In fact, it is estimated that only 1% of these waters are renewed on an annual basis by precipitation, groundwater, and runoff. Moreover, since the lakes turn over and replenish very slowly, anywhere from years to centuries in the case of Lake Superior, they are extremely sensitive to pollution and climate change. The Binational Council of the Great Lakes region is working to accelerate the regional transition to a sustainable future by uniquely bringing diverse perspectives and interests together across borders and sectors to explore and solve the most pressing socioeconomic and environmental challenges as one Great Lakes region. By bringing the environment and economy together in CGLR's work and promoting sustainability in the region's academic research, public policy choices, business decisions, local and regional planning, and capital investments, CGLR is ensuring our regional economy is growing responsibly, our people are thriving, and our environment and the Great Lakes are protected for future generations. In other words, we are finding ways to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. For the sake of time, the Council would like to offer 4 freshwater recommendations for your consideration. More details about each have been provided in the submission to the committee, which I hope you have. The first recommendation would be more funding is required to accelerate restoration work at 7 toxic hotspots or areas of concern. In Canada, there are 12 of them. 5 of them are binational, that are currently not in recovery or delisted as areas of concern. We must increase funding for Great Lakes science and environmental conservation efforts to deepen and accelerate progress on all annexes of the Canada-U.S. Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. We must move faster to create an independent Canada Water Agency with the right capacity and make it both a whole-of-government effort and a national call to action to respond to Canada's and the world's growing water challenges. And then finally, the federal government should move responsibility for the blue economy strategy from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to the Canada Water Agency. And every effort should be made to release a pan-Canadian blue economy strategy with a supporting action plan as soon as possible. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today, and I'd be pleased to take your questions when the time is appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And last but not least, from CropLife Canada, we have Mr. Pierre Patel, President and Chief Executive Officer, who is accompanied by Ms. Terry Stewart, Executive Director of Chemistry. Mr. Patel, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. As you mentioned, my name is Pierre Patel. I'm President and CEO of CropLife Canada. I'll be sharing my time with Terry Stewart, our Executive Director of Chemistry. Thank you for inviting us to participate in your study today of freshwater in Canada. Nous sommes très heureux de souligner quelques-unes des nombreuses façons dont le secteur canadien des sciences végétales contribue activement à la durabilité environnementale du Canada, en protégeant notre biodiversité et la santé des sols, ainsi que la pureté de l'air et de l'eau.
That's what we're working on, Mr.
Testing into English.
Go ahead, Mr. Patel. I'm sorry.
Would you like me to repeat that part, or?
Yeah, for a little bit of it. Yeah. Well, as much as you think.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever was in French, exactly. So, yeah.
Hey, we're happy. We're happy to get here.
Alors, nous sommes heureux de
Okay. Nous sommes très heureux de.
Alors, so we're very happy to underscore some of the many ways in which Canada's plant science sector is contributing to the environmental sustainability of Canada by protecting biodiversity, the health of air, earth, and water. CropLife Canada is an innovative industry working on solutions for the long-term survival and economic growth of Canada.
Our members also develop products used in a wide range of non-agricultural settings, including urban green spaces, public health, invasive species control, and transportation corridors. CropLife Canada advocates for predictable science-based regulations, both federally and provincially, that protect human and environmental safety, as well as encourage innovation and competitiveness.
So thank you. There's no question that the global agricultural community is currently facing some enormous challenges, all of which we've heard talked about today. Climate change, severe weather conditions, water scarcity, increasing global populations, all while the amount of arable land available for agriculture is shrinking due to urban expansion. With water shortages on the horizon for much of the world, growers continue to actively seek out tools that help them reduce water. Canada's agriculture industry is focused on providing crops that are better able to withstand drought and other extreme weather occurrences, are more efficient at storing carbon in the soil, and have better nutrition profiles to help us meet our health needs, as well as reduce the impacts on our healthcare system. Collectively, our ag sector is focused on protecting those crops from various weeds, insects, and diseases, which grow more prevalent each year with climate change. This allows growers to grow more food on less land than ever before, leaving more untouched habitat for pollinators and other species. These innovations are part of a highly regulated system in Canada that protects the health and environment of Canadians. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as well as Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency, ensure that all of these innovations meet high safety standards and are protective of health and environment, including water resources. In terms of why farmers need to use pesticides, pesticides can destroy entire crops, which can increase production costs, making food more expensive. When the crops are lost, so are all the resources, including water, that are used to grow them. Globally, there's over 30,000 different types of species of weeds, 3,000 species of fungi, and 10,000 species of insects that plants must combat on a daily basis. And even today, up to 40% of global crop production would be lost due to weeds and diseases. When we're thinking about pesticides and plant breeding innovations, they help protect crops and give them the best chance of success to make agriculture as efficient as possible. Technologies are being developed or being used to develop and apply crop protection products, and these are changing rapidly. Precision agriculture techniques using GPS, drones, and sensors are helping growers make better informed crop management decisions so that they can use inputs and resources, including pesticides and fresh water, more efficiently, increasing productivity and furthering sustainability efforts. This is all good news for agriculture and the environment.
Ouais, ça tire à sa fin, là, malheureusement, mais il y aura certainement des questions.
There will certainly be some questions for you. On to Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you and welcome to this committee of your parliament. There's a topic that is very interesting to me when we talk about water quality. Many witnesses talked about jurisdiction. Today, we have witnesses that can answer questions about that specifically.
Obviously, when we talk about Great Lakes, we talk about Canada, we talk about United States, we talk about 5 different states, and we talk about, well, Ontario, obviously. So how do you deal with so many jurisdictions to be sure that we can have a clean water in the Great Lakes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for it. There are really 2 main mechanisms where that work happens, first being the Boundary Waters Treaty from 1909. But I think more recently, the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement from 1972. That is really the framework that brings both federal governments together alongside Ontario and Quebec and the 8 Great Lakes states and First Nations and many others to really look at how are we trying to not only restore the Great Lakes from past challenges that we've seen from industrial development and urban development, but how do we protect the Great Lakes for future generations? And I think it's important to say that over the last 50 years, there has been tremendous progress, albeit it's been slow. It's been positive and in the right direction, but there's certainly more that we need to do. We can drink the water, but when it's treated, there are high levels of nutrients in Lake Erie that are causing toxic algae blooms. There are 20 million pounds of plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. It's not just an oceans problem. We're still seeing restrictions on the type and amount of fish that you can eat. So we're making progress, but there's a lot more that we need to do to make sure that the health of the Great Lakes is beyond fair, which is what the status is today. So when you think about that from a federal government and funding perspective, with the new funding that was announced this year, I think we'll be investing about $58 million a year over the next 10 years. It's estimated that the nutrient Lake Erie problem, algae problem in Lake Erie alone will cost the Canadian economy $300 million a year. So we need a lot more investment in science, in protection efforts, in restoration efforts, not just through the federal government, but working with the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, as well as the cities and communities, rural communities that share the coastline of the Great Lakes, and then ultimately trying to do more with the United States.
If we want to fight pollution, we have to identify pollution and where it comes from. So my point is, how can you be sure that where the pollution is coming when you have so many billions of liters of water traveling from, I would say, state to state and country to country? How do you deal with that? Yeah. How can you identify the source of pollution?
So I think it's fair to say that over the last decade, and technology has certainly helped with this, we can do a much better job identifying point sources of pollution and non-point sources of pollution. So point sources are, we know the end of pipe, we know where it's coming from. Non-point, not so much. But there is technology that allows us to be able to identify where that non-point source pollution might be coming from. And I think it's, as it relates to the health of the Great Lakes, the federal government has responsibility for the lakes. It's international waters. But what happens on the land within the watersheds is provincial responsibility. So ultimately, it comes down to what the federal government, the provinces can do together to make sure what's happening on land is not causing further harm to the health of the lakes. And that's where that collaborative governance, that collaborative science and management is so important. And then increasingly, working with large cities, for example, Montreal, Toronto, where you see still to this day combined sewer overflows when there's heavy rain events that are dumping raw sewage into the Great Lakes. that's only going to be fixed by massive infrastructure investments, which cities do not have. They need the support of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and other funding mechanisms to be able to tackle some of these infrastructure challenges that lead to some of these environmental problems in the Great Lakes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fisher, pour votre témoignage.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Miltenberger another question.
I've been part of a government, and you have been, thank you so much for your service as a member of the Assembly there on the Northwest Territories. Based on your experience, can you tell us how territory can deal with the federal government and also with the First Nation? Because Northwest Territories is very specific. And how did you deal with all the different jurisdictions?
Thank you for the question. The first thing we did in the Northwest Territories in my time took us about 60 years as we negotiated a devolution agreement with Canada to take over more of our own autonomy, our own self-government agreement for land and water and resource development. And in my mind, it was, we got rid of about 5,000 kilometers of red tape from when we took over our responsibility with Indigenous governments. We recognize that we have to work collaboratively. We figured out how to do things like co-drafting of legislation, things like the Species at Risk Act and the Wildlife Act, which we did cooperatively with many hands on the pen. A bill that the government took into the Assembly and was voted on.
Thank you. So you're cutting out a little bit. You're cutting out a little bit, Mr. Miltenberger, but in any event, the time has run out. We'll go to Mr. Ali for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here and sharing your knowledge and experience. Mr. Patel and Ms. Stewart, climate change poses a threat to food security. Particularly concerning this year is the very light snow cover in some parts of the country, which means less water provided by snow melt in the spring. If that is followed by a dry summer crop, yields might be considerably lower. I know that farmers are quite resilient and apply crop science to meet challenges. Could you tell the committee about emerging plant science technologies that might mitigate the effect of water scarcity on crops and crop yields?
Yes, well, thank you for the question, and I think it's very pertinent in the sense that if you've heard of CRISPR technology and gene editing, it's kind of the new scientific discussion being talked about now. But in agriculture, it's here and now, and certainly we've had a lot of genetic engineering over the years to make better crops, more resilient crops. But now with the promise of gene editing, this can happen much faster and at a much less expensive. So it brings the entrants can be smaller companies, can be public breeders, universities, not just the larger multinationals that have typically been the founders of the gene technologies up till now. So that's a very promising technology. But again, the regulatory environment that I mentioned in my remarks is really critical because we've been working for 7 years sort of paving the way for gene editing so that CFIA and Health Canada could accept a submission and know how to approve it and how to regulate it. And that's the part that I think we really need a collective whole of government approach, is that if we want Canada to be at the forefront of innovations and some of these technologies, including drought-tolerant crops, crops that are better adapted to some of the climate stressors that we have, short stature crops that are more resilient to wind. There's all kinds of innovations. We've got to make sure that our regulatory environment enables those products. And that's part of the work that we do, is really to create that environment for our members.
Ms. Stewart, do you want to add something to it?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, to Mr. Patel, Ms. Stewart, and Mr. Fisher, we have had some testimony during this study expressing concerns about the lack of incentive for farmers to prevent agriculture runoff into rivers, streams, and lakes, and the resulting threats to water quality. Could you suggest how this situation might be improved?
Yeah, go ahead, start.
Thank you for the question. In fact, it came up, I think, during the last session a little bit with Nutrien. We work with a partnership, collaborative in Ontario called ALICE, which is the acronym for Alternative Land Use Services. It's a fantastic program that is able to engage farmers directly and other partners to look at edge-of-field solutions. So that could be taking out marginalized land and putting in habitats that are positive for addressing climate change, that are positive for biodiversity. And because the farmers are making a decision to take that land out of production, they're getting compensated for that, just as they would for selling a crop. So I think when we can look at these types of innovative programs where a farmer is able to get a benefit for taking that marginal land out of production, and you see nature benefits as a result of that, I think that's a win-win for both the farmer and for government. And so I would look at how does the government play a role in enabling and providing funding for those types of programs, because they work and they're farmer-driven.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, how do you think Canada can build a plan to protect and restore the Great Lakes over the next 50 years as they continue to face challenges from a growing population and industrial activity?
Another great question. So I think it's, as I mentioned before, the health of the Great Lakes increasingly are driven by what is happening in the watershed and upstream. And so I think over the next 50 years, if we're really going to understand change and risks to the lakes, we're going to have to do a better job, at least in the case of Ontario, working hand in hand with the provincial government and with large cities, with rural communities, to make sure we understand what those risks are with respect to point sources of pollution, non-point sources of pollution, the impacts of climate change on the Great Lakes coastline, and trying to tackle these issues in a collaborative way. There's no way we're going to be able to address these issues if the federal government is doing its thing, the province is doing its thing, and cities are trying to manage at the city level. So I think it's really going to come down to collaborative science and understanding the risks and challenges we're going to face the next 50 years, collaborative governance, co-investment, and trying to work together to get ahead and get out in front of some of these challenges. No one level of government is going to be able to solve the issues that we're facing alone.
Merci, Madame Posé, à votre tour.
Avant que vous partiez le compteur.
Thank you. On to Ms. Posey. Before you start counting my time, of course there will be 6 minutes, but will there be a second round? Yes, but it'll be shorter. All right, then let's begin. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Mr. Bouchard, I'd like to ask you some questions. You talked about jurisdictions in your opening remarks. Of course, there's a lot of everybody disagrees on whose jurisdiction certain things fall in. Another witness said that most decisions with regards to water are taken locally. What he managed to do is bring to the table both municipalities and First Nations communities, so it became local. In your opinion, the creation of the is it relevant to create a Canada Water Agency? Thank you for the question. If it's relevant, well, it's an interesting question. Indeed, it is difficult with regards to decentralizing jurisdictions. Here's an example that is quite simple. Controlling navigation on water plans. I know that there are modifications that Ottawa can make, and that was announced in the fall. Since I've been working here, and I am also an elected official in Saguenay, I have been struggling to control the speed of boats, even just on small lakes, and we still need the federal government to make that decision. With regards to the Canada Water Agency, I'm afraid that there will be even more disagreements with regards to sharing jurisdictions between Quebec, Canada, and various municipalities. I feel that there is goodwill, but I am concerned that it will create more problems. I'm happy that you talked about transportation and the Transportation Department. To prepare this study, we sent questions to all departments that might be concerned, and the Transportation Department answered only the questions that were not relevant to them. I'd like to talk about the contamination of PFAS and Labie and Bagotville military base being at the root of it. There is no way to eliminate these substances when water is filtered. Sometimes we talk about in reverse osmosis that can perhaps allow us to eliminate 90% of those toxic elements. But does this municipality have the resources and equipment in place in order to treat these waters that have eternal pollutants in them? Thank you for the question. This issue is a pretty major one in Saguenay. We've been working on this for a number of months. I'd like to talk about the process. Is there a process that exists? The answer is no. I understand that there are places in Canada that do that, and it would be the federal government's responsibility, but there is no process that is officially put in place. That forces municipalities to be faced with uncertainty. The question you're asking is whether cities that are the size of Saguenay have the resources that are necessary. Well, in Saguenay, we do have very experienced public servants, and so we do have human resources, but when it comes to money and funding and finances, it's something else. I would like to say clearly that we did have a very good collaboration from the government with regards to treating water in Bagotville, but we are looking for a new source of clean water and drinking water. It would cost tens of millions of dollars to continue that project. I would like to for you to talk more about funding, because you talked about the responsibility of the federal government. Do you consider that the federal government should fund the necessary operations in order for the region to have clean water? Again, we're talking about the pollutant being the payer as well. Well, right now, I'd say that there are some difficulties. The Government of Canada is not necessarily always recognizing its responsibility. I'm not saying that they fully shirk that responsibility, but it's not that easy to have full accountability. Once that's done, I mean, I do think that it's essential for the Government of Canada to pay those fees. I repeat, there was a certain agreement between the municipalities and the federal government, but there's a lot left to do. I was talking earlier about tens of millions of dollars, and that does mean that there's a financial pressure on the municipalities. It creates uncertainty. There are budgets that need to be drawn up, and of course, it's not easy for a city like Saguenay to navigate these kinds of troubled waters. But of course, the Government of Canada must be accountable. They have to recognize their responsibility and also provide the necessary sums in order to fix this issue in the long term. I have 15 seconds left. In your opening remarks, you said that you would have no problem with regards to improving the help programs, the aid programs, and then also implementing more regulation with regards to boats. Can you tell us more about the long-term positive impacts that those two recommendations might produce? Quickly, interesting enough, $6.4 million were announced today by Quebec for washing stations. In Ottawa, we're talking about more than $1 million with 15 15 stations, but there's no money actually allocated. And so there's a lot of legislation that needs to, and regulation that needs to be made. These stations need to filter ballast water and so on. Thank you. On to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. Maybe just first to Mr. Miltenberger, you cut out a little bit at the end of your last response, and so just wanted to give you an opportunity to finish your thought.
Thank you. Just quickly, I wanted to make the point in the Northwest Territories, we figured out a way that we recognizes the fact that we have to work collaboratively with Indigenous governments, and we figured out that we can write legislation, public legislation, through a co-drafting process, for example. And it's a critical piece because Indigenous governments are huge landowners and they're a level of government that often gets left out.
Thank you so much. And maybe can you expand a little bit and talk a little bit more about what you saw when you know, in your role with the government of the Northwest Territories? What did you see as some of those challenges on water governance between territorial government and federal governments, but also in your role with the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources, how that also interacts with Métis Nations and First Nations?
Thank you. So first, it's clear that water in all its forms is a national issue. It's not a federal issue, it's a national issue. And the things that are happening, like the Canada Water Agency, are things, steps that we think is a good idea. There is no common table right now for jurisdictions to bring the respective jurisdictions, water jurisdictions, to a table to solve big common water issues. It's not a case of fighting over jurisdiction, but bringing your jurisdictions to the table to fix problems that we all acknowledge no one government can do it alone.
Thanks so much. You know, we've heard some pretty horrific testimony from First Nations and Métis communities from Northern Alberta who have been impacted by the devastating tailings ponds leaks. And in your opinion, what are some of the ways the federal government can stop events like this from happening in the future?
Well, I'd just point out, of course, that where I live in Fort Smith, we're north of Fort Chip, so we share the problems and concerns that Chief Tuckerow has raised. In the Mackenzie Basin, there's the Mackenzie River Basin Transboundary Master Agreement that was negotiated with the support and direction of the federal government. There was a very good agreement that exists, and it's led to bilateral agreements being negotiated between the partners, Northwest Territories in Alberta, Northwest Territories BC, Northwest Territories Saskatchewan, and where we've agreed to water monitoring, quality and quantity issues, so that that everybody has comfort knowing that we can manage the affairs and the water those issues in the Mackenzie Basin. The biggest one being there's enough water for environmental flows. So that's an approach that we think has value in other parts of Canada where such agreements don't exist.
Thanks so much for that. And when it comes to the interaction between the federal government, territorial governments, and corporations who are disregarding nature and the environment and having, you know, these impacts on Indigenous communities, yeah, do you see any additional roles for us as federal legislators?
I think carrying on with the Canada Water Agency, taking the advice to make it effective so that it has the resources and authorities and the capacity to bring all the jurisdictions to a national table is important. I think we recognize our legislation as a country is way out of date. The Canada Water Act needs to be looked at to capture a lot of the discussion and concerns that are raised today. And the big thing is to constantly remind everybody, provinces, territories, Canada, and Indigenous government, that this is a national issue. And the only way we're going to solve it is if people come to a common table with their jurisdictions to sort problems out.
Thanks so much. You really outlined how, when it comes to climate change and water management, the status quo is not working, that we need this kind of change. Chair, just how long do I have?
About a minute.
Okay, great. The BC provincial government has noted commitments to working directly in partnership with First Nations and Métis communities on water governance and management, and they've also established a freshwater security fund and are working with Indigenous communities to ensure that their needs are met. Have you heard about this? If so, what are your thoughts, and what kind of lessons do you think the rest of Canada, and specifically the federal government, can learn from these kind of projects?
So, in fact, SEER and the CLI process is currently engaged in the Okanagan, where we are meeting and are going to be meeting next month with mayors and chiefs once again, where they've told us this is the first time that they've ever been in the same room together to talk collaboratively on a co-governance basis at the ground level about these problems, significant problems and challenges that exist in the Okanagan. And if they can get their thinking clear as municipalities and Indigenous governments, then it's easier to turn and pivot to talk to the province about all the support that they're prepared to give that type of process where the solutions can be generated where the problems occur.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to a second round. I'm going to truncate the second round by shaving 40% off the time. So that means basically 3 minutes. Mr. Leslie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Patel and Ms. Stewart, I'd like to start. I appreciated you mentioned some of the technological advancements that our sector has seen, and those that seem to demonize farmers and the associated industries, I don't think have a full understanding. You mentioned GPS sensors. Could you just expand on some of the tech that has made advancements and you expect coming down the pipeline, and not in terms of gene editing just yet, but in terms of the application of crop protection products to more efficiently use water?
Yeah, I think, certainly the more data that is available on the farm in terms of where the product is, we have no interest in pesticides ending up where they don't have their effect, right? So, and neither does the farmer. Some of the precision technology where you've got the nozzles are turning on and off and detecting weeds instead of the crop. I mean, it's to see some of those innovations that are available now, it's pretty mind-blowing. And so all of those techniques are designed to apply the product where it's going to have its most effect and lessen the impact potentially of off-field movement. Drones and other GPS and data is really helping the farmer know exactly, almost to the square foot on their field, what that piece of soil needs in terms of nutrients, in terms of pest pressures, and so all that information and knowledge is making agriculture more and more sustainable every day.
Thank you. It sounds like a good field trip for this Environment Committee to go and see some of these technologies in person. Now, you mentioned data, and that's often in the case for the water or for the farmer or the agronomist to help identify, nutrient needs, things like that. In terms of water monitoring data, though, what's your perspective on how we can ensure that we are correctly collecting data that is going to be accurate and make sure that our decisions regarding crop protection products are scientifically based and not following ideology or any other parameter outside of what the science says?
Okay, great. It's like I'm on Zoom. Thank you for that. I guess to answer that question, I'd like to take just a few moments to talk about why even monitor the water at all. And the water monitoring data can really provide a real-world picture of the potential exposure to inform Health Canada's risk assessments in terms of pesticides that may or may not end up in the water. Currently, Canada does not have a consistent national water monitoring program. So in the absence of this information, PMRA defaults to overly conservative assumptions, resulting in often the cancellations of uses that otherwise would not be a regulatory concern. This reduces the competitiveness of Canadian growers and compromises their ability to combat both existing and future pests. So in terms of a national government-run program. Having such a framework really would ensure quality and consistency, so in terms of methods of detection and sampling collection, use of thresholds that are in line with what is used by Health Canada, sampling done across Canada, including different agricultural areas, as well as to be able to do it at a consistent frequency so that they can conduct trend analysis to understand the levels over time.
Thank you. Could you maybe, is that part of your brief? Maybe it's what you're reading, is that part of your brief so that we can capture it?
No, it's not, but we can
you send it in writing? That would be great. Madame Châtel, vous avez 3 minutes.
Ms. Châtel, you have 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Miltenberger some questions. You provided a lot of wisdom. You said that water is a national issue and that we shouldn't be arguing and wasting time on figuring out whose jurisdiction it's under, and rather bring our skill set to the table in order to figure out how to protect water and nature. So I'd like to highlight my, draw attention to my colleague from the bloc, and I hope she's taking note. We've talked about local communities. Canada and Quebec have signed on to COP15, and the 22 goal says that local communities and First Nations and Indigenous communities have to be at the core of decisions made with respect to nature. Water, of course, is a big part of that. You had a lot of success in bringing together all of these levels of government in order to lead them to taking the right decisions. Do you have any recommendations for the Canada Water Agency, for example, if they must do the same thing with regards to protecting water? Because I do agree this is a national issue with regards to water.
Yes, so let me offer these quick comments. I agree with, it's a very good question. The issue in all the matters that we deal with here, it seems to me, starts with political will. The Canada Water Agency right now is being developed as a federal initiative, and one of the concerns that we have is in the Northwest Territories, for example, is there's no real oversight or involvement of the provinces, the territories, or Indigenous governments at the political oversight level, where you're creating the political conditions for the Canada Water Agency to succeed. And that's a critical piece, and that table, and not fighting over jurisdiction, but looking at how you can bring your jurisdictions together and make them more effective by collaboration, is a real step that I think needs to be dealt with. And the Canada Water Agency needs to have the tools which are now scattered, as we hear, all across government. Monitoring is a perfect example.
Merci beaucoup. Et peut-être pour Monsieur Patel, Madame.
Thank you. And now on to Mr. Patel and Ms. Stewart. We talked about local communities. Farmers are part of those local communities, in my opinion. Do you have a recommendation for the committee as to how the Canada Water Agency, with regards to its collaboration with all levels of government, can include the voice of farmers? Perhaps you can send us a written note on that, and it will give you time to reflect on that and submit something that is consistent, or that is robust. I'd just like to make one last comment. You've talked about pollutants that can cause illnesses in humans and diseases in animals. I imagine that having regulation that is more transparent would be something you'd agree with. What we want is a public system in order to force traceability. I think that would provide more credibility. Mr. Bouchard, a final question. You talked about the population and the pro rata amount that is afforded to clean water, I feel as though other measures should be considered. What measures would you put in place? Thank you for the question. The fund for clean water is related to the federal infrastructure, first to improve economic growth and job creation. I think that that's very noble, but the environmental impact of projects should be considered. So first, I think we have to change the objective of the project. And now onto the pro rata ratio. If we use the principle of per capita ratios, then of course you'll have issues where, for example, you can, fund certain projects to the detriment of other projects that will have polluting effects. I'd like to present an example. In Saguenay, the city I represent, it is 2.5 times as wide as Montreal, but it has just as much infrastructure as Montreal, but 15 times less with regards to population.
Ms. Collins? You have time for one question. Ms. Collins, can you hear us? You have time for one question, but you're on mute. I think. Yeah. Okay, there we go. We're just not. Maybe your headset is turned down.
There's also a button on the headset too.
There's also a button on the headset, I'm told.
On the ear.
On the ear?
Hello.
Yeah, that's much better. We have contact now. Okay.
I just switched it to the internal microphone, and so I'm just wondering if the interpreters are able to interpret well.
No. So
okay. I'll cede my time. It's okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mazier.
Long 3 minutes? Yeah. Thank you. My questions are for Crop Life. How can the federal government best support plant science to reduce the amount of fresh water needed to grow food?
Well, I think I mentioned gene editing as one example. There are crops that are being developed in more arid countries, but will have an applicability to the prairies, which are under severe drought conditions. There are crops being developed that have sort of double the root mass of regular crops, so that you're storing more carbon in the soil. I mentioned short stature crops that are more resilient to strong winds and other weather events. And like I said, drought tolerance and saline tolerance. There's a problem with in Manitoba and other parts of the country with high salinity soils over time, and so these innovations are at our doorstep. And I think what the government can do is what I mentioned is enabling regulatory environment, and really is instead of looking at ways to try to block these things, is to find a way to bring them to market and make sure that it's done in a safe way. We're not afraid of a regulatory environment to make sure the environment and health is protected, but do it in a way that's reasonable and predictable.
I think that's the challenge, right? We've been talking about what is the regulatory avenue for this to happen. Could you submit basically a paper on that as far as the difference between gene editing and the old CRISPR, all these different new technologies versus the old mutagenesis model that we call non-GMO, but yet it's a much more intrusive and prehistoric model, basically. And if you could supply that information to this, and then how it, and then relate it back to water, like what it actually does for our food production systems and how it makes it more efficiency. And then how long does it right now, if you were to use this new method, like how long has it been trying to get this regulatory regime in place in Canada to get gene editing in place?
Yeah, so like I said, we started about 7 years ago to have discussions with the regulators. I think it took a couple of years just to get their attention. I mean, this wasn't sort of on the doorstep yet, but the last few years have been, I'd say it's been encouraging and frustrating at the same time. I think we're at the 11th hour. The last policy we're hoping will be published in March or April, we're told by the department, and that will conclude the regulatory guidance for our members and others on how to bring these products to market in Canada. And we will be, at that point, probably the #1 jurisdiction in the world in terms of predictability and scientific criteria. But it took there's some blood on the floor for
Thank
to
you
get
very
there.
much.
Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again to the witnesses. I'm going to start with Mr. Mittenberger. Last week I met with Stephen Nita of the Letzelke Dene Nation past chief. He told me also about the collaborative process that was being used, or that had been used up in your area. Simply, is that a process that you have a patent on or that you can share with the committee as we look at the Canada Water Act coming up for review? That collaborative process might be very valuable for us to consider.
Thank you. Mr. Nita and I were MLAs together as well, and we've been doing work together. He was involved as a negotiator when we negotiated the Dene National Park. So the political will is there. It's transportable to anywhere, which is why CLI is going around where we are with that model, because it gets two orders of government together that don't normally talk to each other. First Nations tends to talk to Canada.
Is there something you could submit? He also mentioned Michael McLeod had been involved, and he's an MP as well now.
Yes, we can submit. We have many documents on the SEER website that we can capture this for you and share with the committee.
Thank you so much. That would be very. I'm dying to see it myself. I said that's a model that we could all learn from. So thank you, Mr. Patel and Ms. Stewart. Last question over to you. First of all, congratulations to Lauren Hepworth on being an Agriculture Hall of Famer now. Your predecessor with CropLife did some incredible work. The work on the Guelph Statement in particular of sustainability of agriculture and what's done to make sure that the right amount of product is being put on the plants, whether it's fertilizer or pesticide or control products. I'm hearing in our last meeting and now again today that monitoring water involves more than just water, that it also involves soil monitoring, air monitoring. Is that something that you can help us with in terms of technology? Is there some place that you could point us as a committee to include that in our report?
I think from a scientific perspective, water monitoring to look for pollution, point source pollution, is a very good surrogate for determining whether or not the measures you have in terms of your regulatory structure, in terms of your on-field, the buffer strips, the vegetative strip, are those things working? I think water monitoring tells you a very good picture of whether those things are working or not. Soil monitoring is usually more to give the farmer the information they need. When I mentioned that per square foot, it tells them exactly what the nutrient needs are, right down to the small part of their field. So the data needs are different. But there are technologies, and there's some companies that are being invested in that are looking at exactly how to measure that at a field level in real time and give the data to your phone. So it's an incredibly innovative time in agriculture right now. So.
Included in a footnote in our report would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses for your insights and information. Yes, Ms. Collins.
I just wanted to test to see if my microphone is working. And potentially, if I could use my last minute, since we're
Sure, go ahead. A
finished,
very quick question, because you did cede your time, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, rather than asking them questions, since we're done with witnesses, I was wondering if maybe we could unanimously support the motion to bring the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to appear.
Yeah,
for the
of course. If,
supplementary
we unanimously, I think you won't
And
find any
just
objection, because
a quick tweak to add the department officials for the second hour.
because I've spoken to the minister's office, and he's set to come on the 19th.
Oh, great.
So it's all done, but with the officials as well, obviously, because that's how we normally do it. Pardon?
Set for 2 hours?
The meeting, I don't know if the minister will be here for 2 hours, but yeah, but he's been invited, and it's in his calendar. Yeah. Okay.
How about the expenses for a trip to Dubai?
Not yet. We don't have those. I shouldn't say we, but those have not been issued. They have not been issued by the process that tabulates all of this. So anyway, back to you, Ms. Collins. Yes, we all agree with your motion. There's no objection to your motion, because it's de facto going to happen anyway.
Wonderful.
Madame Posé, vous aviez que...
Ms. Posé?
Having a meeting, a full meeting. We're having a subcommittee meeting on Thursday to do a bit of planning. And so I'll see the subcommittee members, but not the rest of you. And yeah, so the minister, when we get back after the break, the minister will be our guest. And I again want to thank the witnesses for your insights and information, and the members for your questions. I wish everyone a very good evening. Thank you very much.